Have you ever sinned and then thought, oh, I'll just confess it and I'll be forgiven by God? No big deal. Have you ever sinned and then confessed your sin before God and then thought, I don't really think God's forgiven me. I don't feel forgiven. 2 Samuel chapter 12 addresses both of these issues. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, Nathan the prophet approaches David. David has committed adultery with Bathsheba. She's pregnant, and he tried to cover it up by killing her husband Uriah. He's far from God. Nathan the prophet, last time David saw him, had praised him. And so when he saw Nathan, he was like, oh, this is going to be good. He's going to praise me. And Nathan tells David a story about a man who owned a little lamb as a pet. And his neighbor had flocks of sheep and lambs and went next door and took that little pet and slaughtered it and ate it. When David heard the story, he said, that man will die for his crime. Of course, Nathan the prophet was illustrating what David had done. He had a harem of women and wives, and yet he stole Uriah's wife, Bathsheba. And so before David understands that the story is about him, he says, that man will die for his crime. Well, stealing a pet is not a capital offense. Killing a pet is not a capital offense. But we try to rid our guilty consciences by passing judgment on other people. When you find yourself judgmental against other people, oftentimes it's because right here you're feeling guilty yourself. The truth is, David did pay for his crime 4 times, just like he said. Uriah's parents lost a son. David would lose 4 sons. Bathsheba's son that she was pregnant with, his son Amnon, his other son Absalom, and his other son Adonijah. He said, you know, I want this man to pay, and he ended up paying himself. In verse 9, God says, you despised me. At one point in the story, Nathan says, you're the man, and he's upset. He's sad that he committed this sin against God, and he realizes that. And as he's getting his judgment, God says, you despised me. Whenever we despise God's commandment, we're really despising him. God says, what you did in secret, but your punishment is going to be public. Your son is going to rebel against you. You're going to lose your wives. And it was. But in the midst of all this, David confesses. He doesn't give excuses. He says, I have sinned. This is real confession. And to illustrate the fact that when we confess our sin, we still have a consequence for sin. God, in this story, and in what really happened, this baby dies. Bathsheba's son ends up being born and then dying. Illustrates that when you sin, yes, God forgives you, but there's a consequence. You can't just say, well, I'll just ask forgiveness, no big deal. No, there's always consequences to our sin, even though there's forgiveness. But to illustrate the fact that God really does forgive, the next thing that happens in the story is equally amazing. Her next son to be born is Solomon, the king, the one who would be passed the kingdom on and be the wisest man who would ever live. God seems to say, you know what, I do forgive you, and I am going to bless you. And so when we sin, we have to remember, yes, there's consequences, and they're severe, and they're more than we ever want to pay. But when we sin, we also have to realize when we confess, it's genuine confession, God genuinely does forgive us.